Looked ahead.
Well, joining us this morning, Andy Williams in a lovely Christmas hat, and Sophia Worringer, I should say political commentator, and Sophia Worringer, Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning.
Did you coordinate outfits?
We did. We should have done, actually.
It's the colour of the season, isn't it?
well, it is the colour of the season, indeed. Let's start, shall we? I don't really know where to start, but shall we start with Prince Andrew, because it's all over the papers if people are waking up. Daily Mail, Andrew has known China spy for 10 years. We've got the Daily Telegraph, MI5 probes Duke's cash from China. The Duke's spy went to palace. I've been talking about this all morning, but essentially it is a terrible look for the King's brother here. Chinese money given to the Duke of York is being investigated by the security services. The venture is understood to have received money from Chinese donors with links to an alleged communist spy. That essentially the Duke has said he has nothing to do with this contact, but it does raise huge questions, doesn't it, about where is the money coming from? Is this kind of some honey trap? How is he paying for a Royal Lodge, this very small 30-bedroom house? I feel desperately sorry for the King, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, Prince Andrew is a walking disaster zone. He has been for a very long time. It always comes back to money with him. It always does. He seems to be on a sort of constant, lifelong quest to amass wealth to pay for his luxury lifestyle.
Well, he says he just has to pay for the 30-bedroom mansion.
Well, exactly, and he seems to be very aggrieved that he might be kicked out of the 30-bedroom mansion. But, I mean, I agree with you that I feel sorry for the King. I felt sorry for the Queen as well when she was alive, having to deal with all of that in very old age. And I actually think
he was her favourite.
Apparently so. But were it not allegedly, but were it not for the Queen's unbelievably strong reputation, and to be fair, King Charles is, I think, very good start as king over the last couple of years, it could have brought down a less robust royal family, the way he's behaved.
Sophia, just in terms of that, I was saying, you know, there's the heir and the spare, isn't there? And I think he's always found it difficult to fit in and to make something of his life. Oh, there are parallels with another couple of brothers as well. But he launched, and I thought when he launched Pitch at the Palace, I thought that was a great idea, that you had the dragons, if you like, and then these British entrepreneurs, they come together at the palace. That was a not-for-profit. He then rolled it out, going back to your point about money, rolled it out around the world, and it became a commercial enterprise. And it's kind of like with Meghan and Harry, but when you're starting to trade on your royal title and there is money coming off the back of it, this is when it all starts to unravel.
Absolutely, and it raises, you're right, the bigger question of what people do who are part of the royal family but not part of that inner circle where they're going out and doing events all of the time and doing the kind of non-glamorous things like cutting the ribbons for the library. That's always the adage. And I think the problem is that they mix in circles where there is a lot of wealth and power, but really they only have power and prestige. They don't have the accompanying wealth. So they need other people, as Harry and Meghan have found, trying to get those Spotify and Netflix deals to come in to fill the wealth gap, which they can't make on their own. And that obviously opens them up to all sorts of people who want to maximise that link for the wrong reasons. And I do think Prince Andrew, he just needs to make better friends. Like, he just has a bad track record of picking the wrong people.
Such judgment.
Well, I was about to say he needs to improve his judgment.
Yeah.
He absolutely does. But he also does, we do have an amazing example of the spare, as it were, who's been diligent and worked hard and not make the limelight about themselves. And that is, of course, the Royal Princess Anne.
Yes,
so it is possible to do. But I think, unfortunately, his character has meant that he just wants to seek the limelight and doesn't accept that he's got a different role.
So is that's a really interesting point. Is it their personality types? Princess Anne always strikes me as someone who gets on and she has a mission. She's not interested in the publicity side of things or in having those great friends or rich friends. She's more down to earth.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't know Prince Andrew personally, but everything that you can see and deduce from his public persona over the years is that he's vain, he's arrogant, and I think most of all entitled. He really, you know, you hear anecdotes about the way he has behaved in private, and he seems to just be a very entitled individual. He feels as though he deserves to live this gilded lifestyle.
But this is a gift to China, right? Because they are trying to exploit links where maybe they... a bit disappointed actually on the returns of Prince Andrew because he's not quite as well connected.
But there are
as
some
they
serious
thought.
security
But it's
concerns
actually a very serious
because this
issue.
is UFWD. This essentially is an organisation run by the Chinese government to essentially glean information, and it is a spy organisation. They gather intelligence, recruit agents, and buy influence abroad. There have to be some very serious questions asked by those people who vet people who come into contact with Prince Andrew. How on earth was he allowed to get so close to him? Not only that, inviting him not only to Buckingham Palace, Windsor and all the rest of it, but again, it goes back to the oversight, I think, from the security services. Surely someone must have flagged it at some point.
I'm sure they did, but I guess maybe the problem is they can't actually completely control what, you know, the royals do in those situations. And there's a big push now to name this person, which seems to be widely accepted as understood that we know who it is. But the person is obviously being protected. But the fact is, if they are named, then it could be a deterrent for other people looking to exploit the similar channels.
I think one other aspect of this is it's actually a PR coup for China, because it shows that they're able to basically infiltrate the British state at almost the highest level. They want to disrupt and they want to cause problems and they want to embarrass the UK, and they have.
And he's a soft target. I was just looking back at 50 years of humiliation. I'm old enough to remember Coo Stark, Randy Andy, the toe-sucking from Fergie, Air Miles Andy. Also, you then have to come further forward, but you've got Jeffrey Epstein, then you've got Virginia Roberts, of course, Giuffre. I mean, literally, and the Newsnight interview, I'd forgotten that, I don't sweat. You know, it's just a catalogue of disaster, and it looks like the King had some knowledge of this, and that's when he said, right, you're out of Windsor. Just want to move on now and talk about this. This is a big story. Brussels. So Keir Starmer, right? I think it's fair to say, had a terrible start to becoming Prime Minister, and he's cozying up to the European Union. And we spoke about this the other week, actually, when Donald Trump, it was mooted that either you have to make a decision, or do you want to be friends with the European Union, or do you want to be friends with the United States? Well, Brussels, in their talks, Brussels is to demand that Britain surrenders fishing rights and follows European laws for the first time since Brexit. EU leaders intend to make the UK accepting the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice a red line for a better trading relationship. So essentially, this document says, right, we're happy to work together. European fishermen would be allowed back into British waters, according to the blueprint. The UK would dismantle their independent marine protection policy and guarantee the right of European fishermen to access British waters. Here we go again. So the EU will demand concessions on fishing, the European Court of Justice, youth mobility. Have we learnt nothing that the EU drives a very hard bargain?
Absolutely. This is outrageous that the government is trying to consider this. And I think that, you know, the Fishing Federation have come out quick out the blocks, calling it a neo-colonial relationship because of the imbalance of power. And I think that they're right. And yes, you may argue that the fishing industry does not bring that much GDP to the country.
Tell that to a fisherman.
Exactly. And it's about the perception of how important it is for our heritage, for our culture, and for the promises that were made during the Brexit campaign. I did read, actually, although this is not a great thing for the fishermen, that ABBA Voyage actually brings in more money than the fishing industry. But I think the point here is that these decisions are made purely on economic lines, and the purpose of fishing and the centrality of it to our country is way beyond just the economic money that it might bring in. So I do think the fishermen are being sold out, and unfortunately so many of them voted for Brexit, and they're going to be disappointed, and that really breaks my heart, because I think that the political class don't understand the challenges of rural life, of those heritages that have gone on for thousands of years, and they just ride roughshod over the top of it, and I do think it's outrageous.
I'll tell you what it says to me is, we don't care how you, the proletariat, vote. We're going to basically do whatever we want anyway. You voted for Brexit. We never achieved Brexit fully, and now we're going to cozy up with Europe, which is a really bad idea given the straits that France and Germany are in, for example. It beggars belief, actually.
I don't agree, actually.
You don't?
No, and I tell you, firstly, this is the start of a negotiating process. So
which the EU are better at.
Which the EU are better at, and they're better at it for two reasons. One, because they're a step ahead of the way the British state operates. And secondly, they are a much big... There's 450, 500 million people in the EU. They're a bigger player. We are the junior partner in that relationship. So, of course, they have a dominant starting position. And they are... what this document is the start of a negotiating process.
If this is their opening salvo, it won't go anywhere.
But what would you expect? That is rational. That is a rational way to behave. Of course, you take.
Why are we cozying up with Europe?
The extreme position because they're our closest trading partner, and so they should be geographically. Obviously, it makes complete sense to do that. Boris Johnson used to say he was pro-cake and pro-eating it. And I think we should take the same approach to the to the US relationship and the EU. We have to have strong relationships with both. It's really important.
What happened to sovereignty? Control of our own borders.
Sovereignty is important. I mean, on the control.
Sorry, just if you are listening, I know that we have a sound problem somewhere.
On the control of our borders point, I mean, you can look at a graph of legal migration. It goes through the roof the moment we leave the EU because Boris Johnson's Brexit deal was so bad.
But this is going to increase our migration because we've got to agree as part of these red lines to a youth mobility scheme. So we'll have even less control of the people coming legally into our country, and that's before you even obviously get to the illegal migrants.
But that's not going to be a high proportion of our overall migration.
But there is a big warning sign here. The EU is going to insist on dynamic alignment and a role for the European Court. If ever there was a time to leave the ECHR, it's now.
I don't think leaving the ECHR will solve anything. I think that's a total red herring. I don't think it's the right thing to do.
But it gives us total autonomy. We don't have to listen to anyone else.
But we keep. This is the thing. We need to stop this obsession with just leaving institutions. If we do this, we
ask people.
Everything's going to be. We don't. The last thing we need in this country is another referendum.
Sophia, you need to answer this. But my issue with all of this is that if you give people freedom, we need to grasp those freedoms. And successive governments haven't given people the freedom.
Absolutely. And the point that people voted for Brexit for was sovereignty. That was the number one thing. They were prepared to take an economic hit to achieve that sovereignty because they felt like in the long run that was the most important thing for the future of the country and for themselves personally. And I don't think the Prime Minister understands this. And I think this has always been in the plan. I think he's always wanted to get closer to the EU. And, you know, these red lines coming out the blocks are going to back him into a corner. He's not going to have any way of negotiating with that because he's put himself in the position of saying, I want something from you from the beginning. So, of course, they're going to drive a hard bargain. I just think it's the wrong decision.
Well, what's in it for us?
Well, what's in it for us is closer economic alignment with a really important trading partner.
With a failing superstate. Where their balance of trade is going down, where they are actually, those countries, particularly France and Germany, those powerhouses not doing well.
But we're a failing state as well.
Well, because we haven't grasped what we should be doing.
Well, we can take different views about what we should have done over the last 8 to 10 years. I mean, the UK economy, according to one report, is £140 billion smaller than it would have been had Brexit not happened.
That doesn't mean
but
that doesn't mean it's because of Brexit. It's a failure to grasp the benefits of Brexit.
Fine. Well, then we need a completely different approach. But what I do not think that the correct approach is to move even further away. I think we did a bad deal, and Keir Starmer is using the opportunity we have for a renegotiation in, I think it's 2026, to improve that deal, and that makes sense.
How's this going to play out with the public?
Not well. I don't think so. And also people are fed up of Brexit in terms of talking about it. And this brings up the divisions again. And actually we need to move on and not keep going back to a kind of relationship that hasn't worked out and trying again and again and again. You've just got to draw a line on it and move on. And I think he's opening up old wounds here and will really annoy the public who, as we remember, voted for Brexit.
Well, and also I think rather than concentrating on this, what people want to see is their taxes coming down, inflation under control. They don't want to keep hearing about a £40 billion hole. They actually want a government that looks after this country as opposed to what they're doing here. There's one other thing here, and if you, in the detail, it says the EU will only do a deal on food exports. if Starmer agrees to put all existing and new European laws on our statute book on food and agriculture. I mean, that's not divergence.
Well, I don't think that's going to fly. I mean, I just don't think it's likely. That would go down very badly indeed.
We've just spent months trying to get them all out, the laws, and now we've got to put them back in.
Done that.
Exactly.
Right, let's just pause for the moment. Andy and Sophia will be back after this break. This is Weekend Breakfast. Good morning. Welcome back. This is Talk. Steve Smedley, good morning to you. While Starmer might be dragging us back to the EU, this is the fault of the Tories who betrayed the voters. They didn't implement Brexit in any proper way. I would agree completely. It was just a bit of a nuisance, Brexit, really, wasn't it? Oh, look, people have voted a certain way, and now we are meant to do something about it. We were also talking about the NHS and the use of private medicine. Does anyone really think, says Nick in Salford, good morning, that Starmer and his family receive the same level of service that Joe Bloggs and his family get from the NHS? I'm speculating here, but Starmer would almost certainly use private healthcare if he was wealthy, but wasn't involved in politics. He would want the level of service that private healthcare can provide, but due to his unique position, he doesn't need to pay for it. If he or his family received bad service, then heads would roll, even if he didn't say anything himself. Keep all of those messages coming in. Also, I'm asking this morning, has the government got its energy policy right? Let me know your thoughts on that. Also, how do you solve a problem like Prince Andrew? 2 quandaries for you this morning. 0344 499 1000. We're in the middle of head-to-head with Andy Williams, political commentator, and Sophia Worringer, Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. Let's move on. And I wonder what you'll think about this, Sophia. So Kemi Badenoch is there. Just in terms of her performance, I don't think she's up to speed yet. She has the odd cracking line. I think there's too much briefing. But she's appearing to be tough because she says sandwiches and lunches for wimps.
Well, she does like to put herself forward as the tough woman. You know, she doesn't need maternity leave, she doesn't need lunch, she doesn't need moist bread. You know, but unfortunately, those are not the lines.
That's a really odd line. I don't eat moist bread.
Those are not the lines that are really going to make sense to the public. They're not really going to understand her as a visionary, as a politician that's promising to change the countries, if these are the things that are getting through. And unfortunately, it seems like the things that really matter are not really getting through. Like PMQs, I think she is growing into the role. I think she is improving, but as you said, a lot of it feels quite scripted. I think she's best, actually, when she's off script.
So do I.
And she's very bullish. And I do think sometimes she can be a bit spiky and defensive, and that's got her to where she is, and that has meant that she knows her own mind, and good for her. But I do think the sandwich thing is just slightly bizarre.
But I mean, I think Starmer's rubbish at PMQs, but his retort to the sandwich debate, oh, it's a great British institution, which, as we know, Earl of Sandwich and all the rest of it, he enjoys. I'm not surprised by this. A tuna sandwich. I'm not surprised by that.
No, I'm not surprised. I think Keir Starmer should. I think it was a bit embarrassing that he responded to that at all. He should have just left it in the ether as a weird comment, because that's what it was. It was a weird, eccentric, strange thing to say that didn't make sense. She also said that she thinks sandwiches are a breakfast food, which I find very strange. The problem, I think, with Kemi Badenoch is that we, understandably, because she's the leader of an opposition that got tonked at the last election, we don't hear much from her. But when we do, the things she say tend to be odd.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm a bit sceptical about maternity leave, and aren't sandwiches weird? And people are like, no and no. I disagree with you. I think, and also to Sophia's point about her being spiky and defensive, that is a double-edged sword for her. You know, she does have a track record of falling out with colleagues.
Well, and also the Sandwich Association has hit back and said, we make a lot of sandwiches every year, and it's a really important part of our economy. I think the interesting thing about that, and it reminds me, actually, going back to Spitting Image, and you have to be a certain age to remember this, Margaret Thatcher, her caricature was she just ate raw steak. Yeah. She was there, she was in charge. Nigel Farage has turned this to his advantage by saying, I love a boozy lunch, so lunch isn't for wimps. And there is, that humanity, or at least that's kind of Nigel's gig, isn't it? That for some reason he talks, you know, not just blokes language, but he understands. You know, I think most of us like a boozy lunch.
Yeah, well, I certainly do.
Yeah.
But I actually wrote down on my pad relatable, because that's what Nigel Farage is, people. He's not my cup of tea at all, but he is relatable. He speaks a normal language. He says broadly sensible stuff sometimes. You know, yeah.
And what people eat for lunch is a very personal thing. It takes what, you know, it tells them a lot about that person.
True.
Yeah.
The previous Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, got under scrutiny for saying that he fasted and had some almonds at about 2 o'clock. Do you remember?
Yes.
And it was part of this idea of him not really being in touch with the average person
California
and this
tech
California
bro, yeah.
kind of wellness industry kind of rhetoric. So I do think that just, you know, normal people eat lunch. Just admit you eat lunch. It's fine to say that you eat lunch while working. Many people do that, but you know, you don't have to say it's weak to
It goes
eat
on the
lunch.
computer.
But I do think she was also tongue-in-cheek. It's been kind of slightly blown out of proportion, and maybe she was thinking this was a way of getting her personality across, but it kind of came out slightly strange.
Well, there's a nice link to this story this morning. MPs, according to this Conservative MP, Alberto Costa, should not be expected to be saints. This is the new chair of the Common Standards Committee. He called for punishments for breaking minor rules to be less severe. He said that when there's a minor failing at work, if it didn't involve corruption, MPs should not have to stand up and publicly apologise. Thoughts?
I think there's so I don't agree with him. There's a kernel of a point in there, in that I think one of the major reasons for the poor quality of our MPs is that they feel, unless they have been saints in their past life, they can't go into politics because everything's going to be dug up, and I think that's a real problem. We want normal people in politics, but some of the scandals we've seen with MPs in the last 10, 15 years, and I think going back even further, have been really shocking and deserve to be called out. You know, you can't be, whether it's Boris Johnson and his wallpaper, I mean, that's nowhere near the worst. All sorts of backbench MPs, whether it's drugs or whatever, you name it, sex scandals everywhere. Like,
Margaret Ferrier getting on a train with COVID, for example.
So criminal activity.
Yeah, I mean, no, they don't have to be saints, but I do think they don't have to be criminals, and they don't have. We do have the right to expect a higher standard of public servants from our MPs.
I think the message is incorrect. I think what you say, you don't have to have been a saint in your past life to come into politics, but I do think once you're there, you need to uphold the principles.
Absolutely,
of that place.
and your personal life and the decisions you make outside the green benches do influence how you conduct yourself inside. Because if you're very duplicitous and you're scheming and you don't think the law applies to you, that will impact your character and will say a lot about how you conduct yourself in the House. So no one's making you become an MP. If you think you've got skeletons in the closet that you don't want unearthed, don't become an MP.
Completely
but I
agree.
do think we need high standards.
Actually, I think one of the real steps forward we've made in the last few years is the introduction of recall petitions, where the public, if 10% of an electorate decide that they don't want their MP anymore, they can force a by-election. I think that's a really good thing, and I think the public should be using that a bit more, to be frank.
They'd be busy. Thank you ever so much, both of you. That's Andy Williams, political commentator, Sophia Worringer, Deputy Policy Director at the Centre for Social Justice. That was today's Head to Head.
Head to Head.